It's election day, and here are my final predictions for each state as their polls close tonight, hour by hour. Back in the 2020 cycle, my final prediction correctly picked outcomes in 49 of 50 states. Polls close at 7 p.m. Eastern in 6 states, starting with Indiana and Kentucky. These states are strongholds for former President Trump. He won Indiana by 16 points and Kentucky by 25 in the last election. Trump is also expected to win South Carolina with a double-digit margin. While not as solidly red as some Deep South states, it hasn't voted Democratic since 1976 and went for Trump by about 12 points in 2020. For VP Harris, she is set to easily win Vermont, arguably the nation's bluest state. The remaining states, Virginia and Georgia, are more competitive. In 2020, Joe Biden won Virginia by 10 points. This year, however, the race tightened considerably before Biden dropped out, as Trump even led in the final pre-Harris average. With Harris now leading the ticket, she holds an average lead of nearly 6 points across the last 5 polls, which is less robust than Biden's previous margin. 2 polls show her ahead by just 2 points. Virginia, therefore, is classified only as lean blue going into tonight, a downgrade from its likely blue status at the start of the cycle. But unless something dramatic happens, I foresee a D+4 to D+8 margin for Harris in Virginia, depending on turnout and late-breaking voters. Now let's focus on Georgia and its 16 electoral votes, a critical battleground state that will give us the first clues as to who wins tonight's election. Georgia state law now mandates that counties must report their early and absentee votes before 8 p.m., so we expect to see between 70% to 90% of the total votes counted by then. Recall that in 2020, Georgia swung to the Democrats for the first time since 1992, with Biden winning by a razor-thin margin of just 0.2%, the narrowest in the nation. This victory was propelled by significant turnout and strong Democratic margins among black voters, especially in and around Atlanta. However, moving into the 2024 election, Trump has made notable inroads with black voters, increasing his support by nearly 20 percentage points from 2020, according to aggregated polling data. This shift, combined with a reported lag in black voter turnout during early voting, could prove fatal for Democrats, again considering how narrow their margin was in 2020. Current polls from Decision Desk HQ show Trump ahead by 1.7% on average across 69 polls, a lead that remains a typical polling error from flipping to Harris. Yet Georgia is also one of the more fundamentally Republican battlegrounds. Its electorate is generally more religious and thereby socially conservative, which means the issue of abortion isn't the calling card for Democrats here as compared to the Rust Belt trio of Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, or the Southwest battlegrounds like Arizona and Nevada. Consequently, it comes as no surprise that the betting markets are leaning towards Trump with a 66% probability of his victory on poly markets. I tend to lean this way too, as I place Georgia down as tilting Republican on my map with a forecasted margin of around R+1 to R+2. Again, this will provide us with a good barometer of the night thereafter. If Trump isn't leading in Georgia by at least a point, that could be a good sign for Harris elsewhere. Next, as election night continues and 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time approaches, polls will close in Ohio, West Virginia, and North Carolina. Starting with West Virginia, this is one of the most Republican states in the country. Trump is a lock here. As for the state of Ohio, long considered the ultimate bellwether, it backed Trump by 8 points in 2020, even as he lost nationally, effectively ending the old adage, as goes Ohio, so goes the nation. That said, there is some evidence to suggest the Democrats' bleeding in Ohio could come to a halt here in 2024 as Trump continues to underperform that margin in the polls at 7.6% based on 20 total surveys. We also know that Ohio and Iowa are closely correlated, and if it's true that Harris is more competitive than expected there, as per the D+3 Selzer poll released this weekend, then that may also be true here in Ohio as well. There's simply a limit to the gains Republicans can make here and in broader Appalachia. Trump should still carry Ohio by a comfortable margin of around 6 to 10 points, but it wouldn't surprise me if it trends left relative to the nation as a whole. As for North Carolina, our second of the 7 key battlegrounds, along with Georgia, it should give us some of the first clues tonight. Despite its routinely competitive nature, Democrats haven't won a federal election here since 2008. Republicans have taken the last 8 presidential and Senate races, all by margins of less than 6 points. Trump carried North Carolina in 2020 by just over a point, and the latest Decision Desk HQ average has him leading by almost the exact same margin. 73 polls have been surveyed and released in the Tar Heel state since May, and Trump averages 49.3% over Harris's 47.9%. And again, we see the public consensus clearly sitting in Trump's favor as we enter D-Day, with Trump's odds on Polymarket sitting at 69%. Ultimately, the data favors Trump, and we have consistently seen Democrats underperform the polls here in the final results over the last few cycles as well. Until I see that fundamentally change, I'll keep giving Republicans the benefit of any doubt here as it joins Georgia in the tilt Republican column. With these updates, Trump's electoral count rises to 81, leading Harris's 16. Before we get there, though, I want to take a quick moment to give a shout out to the partner of this video, Geology. If you've ever struggled with finding the right skincare routine, you're not alone. Geology makes it easy using only proven dermatologist-approved ingredients, reducing oiliness, preventing wrinkles, and combating dark under-eye circles. The best part? It's totally customized just for you. Geology takes all the guesswork out of skincare. You just hop onto their site, take a quick 60-second quiz about your skin goals, and their team of dermatologists creates a routine that's shipped straight to your door. Right now, you can grab 70% off your personalized skincare trial set, plus up to 50% off add-ons. Just use my code PREDICTIONS70 at checkout. You're getting over $49 worth of products for just $15. So don't wait. Click the link in the description and get started on your personalized skincare journey with Geology today. Our next poll closing comes at 8 p.m., the largest batch of the night, with polls closing in 17 states and both congressional districts in Maine and Nebraska's 2nd District. Alrighty, let's start by filling in the solid states for Harris. She'll easily carry Maine's 1st congressional district, which Biden carried by 23% in 2020. From there, she'll continue to dominate along the northeast coast, taking Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Connecticut, New Jersey, Delaware, Maryland, and of course, Washington, D.C. She'll also come out on top in Illinois. Each of these states voted for Biden by at least 15 points in 2020. And while we're seeing some signs of eroding Democratic support in big blue cities like Chicago and in the New York metro area, Harris will almost certainly still carry both Illinois and New York, where the polls close at 9 by double digits once all the votes are counted. Meanwhile, Donald Trump should have no trouble holding the solid southern states: Oklahoma, Missouri, Tennessee, Mississippi, and Alabama. Each of these states went for Trump by at least 15 points in the last election and haven't voted for a Democrat in 3 decades. Now, moving on to the more competitive races at this hour, starting with Florida, there's a strong chance that the Sunshine State could be called for Trump as soon as polls close at 8 p.m. This is because most of Florida's counties close their polls an hour earlier at 7, with just a few counties in the Panhandle continuing to vote until 8. Additionally, the vast majority of Floridians cast their ballots before Election Day, either by mail or during early in-person voting. Like in Georgia, Florida's state law allows for those ballots to be counted almost immediately, so we should see most of the vote reported before 8 p.m., and given that Trump is on track to carry the state by the widest presidential margin in decades, Florida might very well be the first major state called tonight. It was one of only 5 states where Trump improved his performance from 2016 to 2020, increasing his margin to 3.4% over Biden, compared to just over 1 point against Clinton in 2016. Then in 2022, we saw the Republican incumbent governor and senator both reelected by more than 15 points each. Currently, 2024 polls show Trump leading by 6.5 points over Harris, putting him on track to achieve the largest margin for a presidential candidate in Florida since 1988. I've got it down in the likely column here. with a projected margin of around 6 to 10 points. Now let's turn to Pennsylvania, the most important state on the map and the third of our 7 key battlegrounds. With its 19 electoral votes, Pennsylvania is the state most likely to decide the election. According to Nate Silver, there's a 34% chance it will push either candidate past 270, more than double the likelihood of any other state. And with a win here, both Harris and Trump's odds of winning skyrocket to around 90%. The polls show we're headed for another extraordinarily close margin in Pennsylvania. Trump took the lead 2 weeks ago and continues to hold that edge by 0.7% right now based on 112 polls, with a 48.7% vote share over Harris's 48% flat. Needless to say, this race also remains within the realm of error. The prediction markets are a bit more bullish on Trump's chances, giving him a 58% chance of winning. While I think that's slightly optimistic, it's not too far off. I'd probably give Trump about a 55% chance of winning, which, for what it's worth, is the same probability I'd give him to win the whole thing. That's because I think whoever wins Pennsylvania wins the presidency. Ultimately, the available quantifiable data suggests a slight edge for Trump. Party registration trends in Pennsylvania have shifted strongly towards the Republicans since 2020, and early voting patterns have not looked promising for the Democrats. More broadly speaking, I do think Harris will struggle to replicate Biden's unique appeal in this broader Rust Belt region, specifically with older working-class white voters. She'll also need to rely on the gender gap as well as younger college-educated voters to offset lower turnout among minorities in major cities like Milwaukee, Detroit, Philadelphia. Perhaps the single most damning fact of all for her, though, is the fact that Pennsylvania voted 6 points to the right of the nation in 2020, marking the second consecutive election in which it leaned more Republican than the country as a whole. Before that, it hadn't happened since 1948. New Hampshire and Maine, on the other hand, are much more friendly to Democratic candidates. They tend to fall in line with the rest of the deep blue New England region, though are routinely more competitive. New Hampshire voted for Biden by 7 points in 2020, and he won Maine by 9. It would simply take a true landslide environment for Trump to contest either state, and that's just not in the cards at this point. Both are likely for Harris here. That does leave us with the competitive 2nd congressional districts in both Maine and Nebraska. Maine 02 is extremely rural and one of the oldest, whitest congressional districts in the country. Trump won it by 7 points in 2020 and should again back him by a pretty comfortable margin. It is likely Republican. Nebraska 02, on the other hand, is the complete opposite. It's almost entirely urban, covering the city of Omaha, and Biden carried it by 6.5 points in 2020. It's likely to trend even further left here in 2024. And continuing on to the next poll closing at 8:30 p.m., the polls will close in just one state, Arkansas, which is safe for Trump. Our next major poll closing is at 9 p.m., which brings in the second largest chunk of electoral votes for the night. I like to call this battleground central time, as polls close in key states like Arizona, New Mexico, Texas, Colorado, Iowa, Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Michigan, plus New York, and a smattering of less competitive states in the middle of the country. First, let's mark down the safe Republican states. Trump will easily carry North and South Dakota, Wyoming, Nebraska statewide, along with its 1st and 3rd congressional districts, Kansas, and Louisiana. As for Iowa, prior to this weekend's Selzer poll, it teetered on the edge of being a safe Republican state. Just like Ohio, Iowa voted for Barack Obama in 2008, and then again in 2012 before swinging hard to Trump, who won it by 9 points in 2020 and then by 8 in 2024. It entered this cycle as an afterthought and mostly stayed that way all cycle up until the revered Selzer poll shook the political scene on Saturday night. She found Harris up 3 points over Trump and has never missed the outcome by more than 5 points. Whether it's a fluke or indicative of a massive Democratic overperformance among white voters, particularly women and younger voters, I remain deeply skeptical of Harris's chances. I'd be shocked if Trump's margin dips anywhere below 5 points once all the votes are counted. Now, as for Kamala Harris, she is certain to carry New York with its 28 electoral votes. The Empire State has trended definitively right in recent cycles and is expected to again shift toward Trump here in 2024. But Democrats have consistently carried New York by at least 10 points in every election since 1988, and that should continue here. Harris is also expected to carry Colorado by a comfortable margin. Colorado is the fastest left-trending state in the nation, having backed Biden by 13.5 points in 2020, just 4 years after it was considered a competitive battleground in 2016. Now let's shift our focus back to the Midwest with the remaining 3 states in the critical blue wall region: Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Michigan. Along with Pennsylvania, these states voted blue in every single election cycle from 1992 leading up to 2016, when Trump broke through, flipping Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania into the Republican column, while coming within 2 points of flipping Minnesota over Clinton as well. But then, in 2020, Biden managed to flip Michigan back by 2.8%, Wisconsin by just 0.6%, and he expanded the Democratic margin in Minnesota to 7 points. Now, the latest polling average in Minnesota via Decision Desk HQ has Harris leading by a narrower 5 points, based on an average of the last 15 polls. Again, it would take a landslide for Trump to flip Minnesota, and that's just very unlikely to happen. It joins Virginia as lean blue. Now, as for Michigan and Wisconsin, these are both effectively must-win states for Harris at this point. Without them, her path to 270 electoral votes becomes very difficult, especially if she loses Pennsylvania, not to mention North Carolina and Georgia. Right now, Trump leads with an exceptionally narrow margin in Wisconsin of just 0.2% based on 88 polls. You can see here on the trend line graph how Harris had led by 2 to 3 points here throughout August and September. For a while, it seemed to be her strongest battleground in terms of polling. Now, that title belongs to Michigan, where Harris leads by 0.6% based on 87 polls. The split currently sits at 48.7% Harris to 48.1% for Trump. The betting markets also suggest Harris's best odds are in Michigan, where she is now viewed as a clear favorite over Trump with a 62% chance of winning. You'll also note here that she's favored in Wisconsin with a 57% chance as well. Back on my electoral map, I've got Michigan as tilt blue for Harris. For those of you who have followed this channel all cycle long, you'll know I've generally been more pessimistic than the general public on Harris's chances in Wisconsin. The Badger State has been the site of 2 of the largest polling misses underestimating Trump. In 2016, Clinton led by 6.5 points in the final poll average, only to lose the state by 0.7%. Then, in 2020, Biden led by a similarly large margin, yet held the state by just 0.7%. Wisconsin is also the whitest and most rural state in the core Rust Belt trio. If Trump overperforms among white working-class voters, like in 2016, Wisconsin will likely be the front line for that shift. That all being said, it appears now more likely than ever that racial depolarization will be the story of this cycle. While Black and Hispanic voters trend right, white voters, specifically women and college-educated young people, are moving left. That lends to the Democrats' chances in the whiter Midwest. While I obviously remain very skeptical of Harris's chances in Iowa, it does point to a broader trend that could help her in Wisconsin. At this point, I think Wisconsin will be the closest race of the night in terms of margin, and therefore the hardest to predict. While my gut trends toward Harris, my instincts are telling me to stick to what I've been preaching all cycle. I'll place Wisconsin down as tilt Republican here, though I would not be remotely surprised if Harris pulls it out. All right, before we head down to the Southwest, quick status update here in the race to 270. Trump leads with 223 electoral votes. Harris trails behind with 158. Please take this moment to subscribe to my channel below. My channel analytics tell me less than 20% of you are currently subscribed. It's totally free and means a lot to me. Thanks. Alrighty, let's head down to Texas, the second largest prize on the map, worth 40 electoral votes. A slowly emerging battleground, Joe Biden received a higher share of the vote here in 2020 than any Democrat since Jimmy Carter carried Texas back in 1976. But even as urban areas like Dallas and San Antonio shifted hard to the left, unless Democrats can put a halt to the even more rapid rightward trend down here in the Rio Grande Valley, and more broadly among Hispanic voters in Texas, it's hard to see the party getting any closer to the fabled Blexus this cycle. In fact, according to the latest poll average here, Trump leads by 7.5 points on average, a point improvement upon his previous margin. I've got Texas down as lean Republican on the edge of likely. On a somewhat related note, New Mexico is the most Hispanic state in the nation and is expected to trend more Republican than the nation as a whole. For now, though, it remains likely blue just 4 years after Biden carried New Mexico by 11 points. Finally, wrapping up the 9 o'clock closings in Arizona, the second closest state in 2020 by margin. Biden won Arizona by just 0.3%, with 49.4% to Trump's 49.1%. Like in Georgia, Biden's victory here was largely due to the rapid growth and diversification of its largest population center, Phoenix. But now, in 2024, Trump continues to lead Harris by more than 2 points in the latest polling average. Notably, Arizona is the only core battleground state where Trump has led consistently even after Biden dropped out of the race. In looking at prediction markets, Trump has a 76% chance of winning Arizona, the best odds he has in any of the 7 key battlegrounds. This is largely driven by the massive advantage Republicans have built up in the early vote. Out of more than 2 million ballots cast already, 42% were returned by registered Republicans as opposed to 33% by registered Democrats. The independent vote in Arizona has tended to lean left in recent cycles, so the margin is still likely to be very close. But here on my map, I have Arizona as a tilt Trump state, adding 11 electoral votes to his growing tally, pushing him up to 274, meaning he is now projected to secure a non-consecutive second term in the Oval Office. Fast forwarding to 10 o'clock on election night, the polls will close in Montana, Utah, and Nevada. Trump is almost certain to win both Montana and Utah, while Nevada remains as our final battleground state. Worth only 6 electoral votes, it doesn't carry the same weight as the others, but is just as competitive. Biden carried Nevada by 2.4% in 2020, identical to Hillary Clinton's margin from 2016, even though the nation as a whole shifted bluer between those elections. In fact, 2020 marked the first time Nevada voted to the right of the nation since 2004. Republicans also flipped the governor's office in 2022 and received more votes for the U.S. House than Democrats for the first time in decades. Now in 2024, no other state had shifted harder to the right in the polls, while Biden remained in the race. Trump led by 5.5 points prior to the president's withdrawal, marking an incredible 9-point swing since the 2020 election. When Harris took over, she immediately pulled back most of those gains, even leading Trump for some time. But now with 56 polls added to this average, Trump leads by more than a point, at 48.9% to 47.6%. The headline in Nevada, though, is the early vote. Broadly speaking, the fundamentals in Nevada should favor Harris slightly. With Nevada's relatively low turnout compared to other swing states, the vice president's fundraising advantage and presumably stronger ground game should have played a bigger role. Plus, Nevada's proximity to her home state of California might provide her with a small geographical boost. For those reasons, I would have given Harris the slight edge in this coin flip race. Yet the early vote here was truly abysmal for Democrats, day after day. Normally, entering election night, we'd be talking about how large the Democratic firewall here is, and whether Republicans have the juice to overcome it on election day. Instead, we see Republicans outvoting Democrats by 4 points among more than 1 million votes cast early, which accounts for most of the total estimated vote. There's just no other way to see it at this point. Trump is favored in Nevada. All right, now we arrive at our penultimate poll closing at 11 p.m. Eastern, 8 p.m. Pacific. Polls will close in Idaho, Washington, Oregon, and California. Trump is sure to win Idaho, while Kamala Harris will sweep each of the West Coast states, securing the Pacific Blue Wall for the 9th consecutive cycle. This includes her home state of California, which holds the largest electoral prize on the map, 54 electoral votes. That leaves us with just the non-contiguous states of Alaska and Hawaii, where polls close at midnight Eastern. Alaska is safely in Trump's column. His 2020 margin of 10.1% was the closest in the past 30 years. But even if it narrows, there's no realistic scenario where Harris flips Alaska. Hawaii, meanwhile, is solid for Kamala Harris. Thus, the final Electoral College projection is Trump securing 297 electoral votes to Harris's 241. Trump flips Nevada, Arizona, Georgia, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, while Kamala Harris holds on to Michigan. This is my final projection headed into election night, but I want to make it abundantly clear. This race is effectively a toss-up. Either candidate could realistically hit 300 electoral votes. No outcome would surprise me, and neither should it surprise you. I just happen to believe this scenario is most likely. That does it for this 2024 presidential election map, prediction, and analysis. Let me know whether you agree or disagree with these ratings in the comments below. I appreciate you sticking with me throughout the cycle, and good luck to you tonight. Shout out to my channel members in the description below. Thank you so much for your support. Make sure to subscribe down below, and please leave a like on the video if you enjoyed it as well. Check out more content from my channel here, and as always, thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time. EP out.